and gentlemen, it is time for the 2025 NHL Mock Draft 2.0. Now, the last time I made a top 16 simulation was all the way back in October, and a lot of things have changed, not just with the teams at the top of the draft lottery order, but also which prospects are at the top of the draft rankings. You guys know how we do it on this channel, though. We're going to simulate the draft lottery, see who gets first overall, and of course, the first overall debate there, and we're going to go through the rest of the top 16 to see which prospects fit with each team. So make sure you watch till the end to see who your favorite team could go after, and of course the scouting reports for each top prospect. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more draft content just like this, as we look to build a draft this summer, presented by BetUS. Now, before we get into the draft simulation, we first got to go through the lottery simulator, see who gets first overall here. And as you guys can see with the top 5 odds, we got the Blackhawks, the Sharks, Preds, Sabres, and Kraken in that order. And we're just going to simulate and go right through here to see who gets that first overall spot. It's going to be interesting. And Anaheim, who we didn't even mention, comes up 6 spots to that first overall position. Nashville also raises up 1 to number 2. Some pretty heavy implications here for that first overall pick. Now, let's talk about that first overall pick and the Anaheim Ducks. This is an interesting one because I think for other teams, there could be a couple of players in the mix for that first overall pick. But for Anaheim, I could see them going all across the board. In terms of that core 4 we've been talking about this season, you got James Hagens, Matthew Schaefer, Porter Martone, and Michael Misa. All 4 of those guys, I think, are locks to be the top 4 picks in this draft. And just going through process of elimination, I think the first player we can count out is Matthew Schaefer, even though I think he would be extraordinary on that Ducks defense. You already got Pavel Mintyukov, Stijn Solberg, and Terrence Smith, 3 guys that I think will be quality top 4D in their own respects as left-handed D, and I think adding another one would just make it hard for all those guys to fit. I think you could make it work. I think Schaefer is better than all of those guys, but I think considering the wealth of options Anaheim already has, Schaefer finds himself on the outside looking in. The next one I believe that Anaheim won't draft is Michael Misa, just because I think, especially when you look at their center situation, Misa is a lot more like the centers they already have in Leo Carlsson, where they're really driven by the smarts and their positioning. In Misa's case, that is one of the biggest strengths with him. I do still think he could be the best out of the centers there, especially when you compare to a player like Mason McTavish. I think Misa absolutely clears a player like that, but I feel like for Anaheim as well, if they're looking for a center, if they're going to draft one, it's going to be a top-end pace pusher. Which leads me on to the 2 options I think will be the most appealing to Anaheim in James Hagens and Porter Martone. And I think they could go between either of these 2 players. In Anaheim's case, they don't usually draft as small as James Hagens is, but I think they could really use a true undeniable pace pusher that James Hagens is, with the speed that he creates, the creativity with his vision in the passing game. It's all extraordinary, and I think in Hagens' case, he would be a pretty great Anaheim Duck leading that first line. But I'm going to be honest, with how Anaheim has drafted over the past few years, where they really love their big power forwards, to me, no matter what position they're at, if Porter Martone is available, I think they select him no matter what. And this is a big surprise. Out of all the 4 guys, I think Martone is the least likely to go first overall. But considering Anaheim's needs and what they've drafted before, I think Martone fits the best. Now, I think a lot of people will be saying, hey, but they already got Beckett Seneca in the last draft 3rd overall. Why would they draft another right wing? Well, to me, I think both of these guys are pretty different in their own ways. In Porter Martone, he uses his size. He is a true power forward, really grinding play down. I think pace is a little bit of an issue, whereas in Beckett Seneca's case, pace and vision and creativity up the ice is exactly what his game is for. So you have Seneca, who's a lot more of a transition dominating right winger, whereas Porter Martone is just a good cleanup player who can do a lot of different things for you and be the Swiss Army knife. I think especially for the Ducks, they're going to love Martone's physicality, love how undeniably charismatic he is, love how much he just puts himself out there every single shift. And even though they have Seneca as a potential right wing for the future, I think Martone and Seneca as a top 2 right wing would be a pretty good set to have. But that leads us with a pretty big shakeup onto the Nashville Predators at 2nd overall, and they have a pretty interesting decision to make with, in my opinion, the 3 prospects that are the best in this draft still on the board. Now, before we get to that 2nd overall pick, let's first talk about today's sponsor in BetUS. The place to make picks throughout this hockey season. They got so many options, whether you're looking at the NHL, you can also go for the NHL draft and that first overall picks odds. And also, they just released their 4 nations odds, which I found pretty interesting because the US actually are leading at plus 160. If you're like in Canada, though, which I still think they're the favorite, they're at plus 170, which I think is pretty good odds for them. So we'll see what happens there. But whether the tournament, no matter the tournament, no matter the game, no matter the league, BetUS is the place to make your picks. Just use code YouTube150 when you sign up to get a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit. And thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. Let's get back into the draft order. Now, going on to Nashville and the 2nd overall pick, they're going to have a ton of options here, and I could see them going for literally every one of these 3 players and having a great reason why. But to me, when we look at what Nashville has also prioritized in the past, with some of their high-end draft picks. To me, I think they will go for defense, and I don't think they're going to be able to deny Matthew Schaefer's talent. To me, this just makes so much sense for the Preds. And sure, they already have Terry Molendyk as an upcoming lefty, but I think he's going to be a solid defenseman, not nearly as good as what Matthew Schaefer is. And I think they want to have a Roman Josi of the future. Molendyk, I think, will be solid, but he's not that type of player. Schaefer, I think, absolutely can be. With the creativity and in transition, with just how confident he can be, he radiates offense and radiates confidence. And you can see what he's been able to do in both the OHL and the World Juniors this year. I think Nashville is going to be absolutely in love with this player, especially considering the defense being pretty all right for a more offensive defenseman, especially at his age. I think Nashville is going to be in love with him, and at second overall, that's a great pick. But now we go on to third overall in the Chicago Blackhawks, and that leads both James Hagens and Michael Misa on the board. And you could make the case, and in my opinion, they are the two best prospects in this draft. Just how the draft order has come up to this point, it's really good for that third overall spot. And for Chicago, they're going to have a bunch of options here. To me, with both Misa and Hagens, I think they both could fit Chicago and what they need going forward. I think Misa is a little bit more of a pure player fit just because he's more of a defensively strong player with the activity he has, with the vision he has, the IQ he's able to bring. He's somebody that I think can match Bedard and kind of make up for some of those weaknesses. But Hagens is a player that is pure pace, and on top of Bedard, those two guys would be absolutely brilliant in terms of creating offense and just bringing so much skill. I think for Chicago, they could go either way, and it's been a really hard one for me to actually talk about. But I think at third overall, even with all of the hype of James Hagens, because of the draft order and because of how it's shaken out, I think Michael Misa is going to be the pick by Chicago. I look at Connor Bedard and Michael Misa, and I just see the next Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. In terms of player styles, I think it's pretty accurate. You have Connor Bedard as that electrifying pace pusher, while Michael Misa can be just this overall undeniably great centerman and somebody that I think Chicago could really use. They have a lot of players who are more on the offensive leaning end, which is why I think Hagens won't be the pick. I think they'll want to go for a bigger player, a stronger player, and a more defensively well-rounded guy. And Michael Misa absolutely brings that, especially in the leadership category where he's already the captain for Saginaw just barely this week, being named captain. And just look at what he's been able to do in the OHL. 72 points in 37 games, 35 goals. And also with the preference we've seen recently for the Blackhawks going from the CHL, I think Misa is going to be something that really is tantalizing for Chicago and ultimately ends up as their selection. To me, James Hagens is the best prospect in this draft, but because of the draft order and team needs, I think that, especially with the top four being so even, will play a factor. And so far with this draft order, it absolutely has. Which, of course, leads us on to the fourth overall pick and the San Jose Sharks. And let's just get into it. They will be running up to the podium to select James Hagens out of BC. I mean, just thinking about a Celebrini and Hagens top two center core is enough to make a grown man cry for a lot of different reasons, especially for the Sharks. I think this would set up their forward core basically for the next 20 years. It would be just that good. You look at what James Hagens has been able to do this year. Great statistics, both in the NCAA and the World Juniors. But to me, the vision, the creativity, the pace of play, it's all at a high-end level of Hagens. I think there's still some more defensive issues and some muscle that he does need to build. But I think in his case, he could go back for another year to BC. I think the Sharks are in a position where they can give him some patience, which I think would be good for him, all things considered. When he is there, though, for the Sharks, he's going to be an undeniable player with the skill set that is to die for. And I think with Celebrini, he can also fit into more of that Selke Trophy mold, while having Hagens is more of the offensive positions, which I think for the Sharks will create a center duo that is practically unstoppable. But of course, with this draft, we all know that it opens up pretty completely after the top four selections. And at number 5, we have the Buffalo Sabres, who could go all over the place. But to me, I look at Buffalo, who is disappointed again, and I think they're going to go in a different direction from some of their draft picks in the past, where it was a lot more skill, it was a lot more pace focused. Let's go on to Roger McQueen, who I think will be the 5th overall pick by Buffalo, just because of some of the strengths that he does have. He is a great power forward, using his body well, and the skating level is pretty good for his size, too. And he's somebody that I think at points can be a great power forward in the NHL, too. You can see in the WHL this season in 8 games, 8 goals, 3 assists, 11 points, hopefully coming back soon and can show off that skill set. He's somebody that I'm a little bit lower on compared to some other people, and especially lower on than at 5th overall. But he's somebody that I think for the Sabres, if they're trying to go in a different direction, a bigger direction, McQueen does fit that mold. And especially if they're a team that trades Dylan Cousins too, they're going to need a second line center for the future. And I think McQueen could be able to fill that if his potential is met. Now, like I said, folks, after the top 4, this draft opens up completely, and at 6th overall with Seattle, that is a great example of it, because I think for them, they could really stand to add a defenseman. That's what I thought they were going to do in the last draft before they went after Berkeley Cannon, but I think this is definitely the year it's going to happen. And I think at 6th overall, they're going to select now from Seattle, Radim Mrtka, who, of course, has transitioned on from Czechia to the WHL with the Thunderbirds, and they're going to be getting a lot of looks with this guy. But to me, I think there's a lot of shades of Dmitry Simashev, a great skating, mature defenseman who offensively, I think, is bringing more pop than maybe was expected. You can see in 17 games, 2 goals, 13 assists for 15 points. I think he's been pretty solid in transition. Confidence has been good so far. There is still a lot of kinks that you have to work out with some of the actual offensive reads and the quickness of play, but I think he's learning and adjusting pretty well to the WHL so far in the North American game, which I think is huge. Considering the tools there and for what Seattle really likes in their defensemen, I think they could really use a more physical, bigger defenseman in that pool. Mrtka checks all those boxes. Now we go on to 7th overall in the Philadelphia Flyers. This was one that I went through so many different guys, so many different options, but to me, if Philadelphia wants to go for something a little bit different but still on brand, a player that I think would be such a good Philadelphia Flyer, I think Victor Eklund would be so much fun. Now, this is kind of a little bit of a wishing thing, because I want Philadelphia to draft Eklund. I think he would be absolutely amazing. Imagine a Eklund, Uchenko, and Michkov line. I think those 3 guys would be so good together. But I think Eklund, if you disregard the size, plays exactly how the Flyers want to play. His board battles, he is so good at getting around the ice, using his body, even if it is at a smaller stature, using the quickness that he has, using the edges, getting in front of the net. He is just such a good physical player already, even if that size isn't there. But I think the more he bulks up, the more he will get better at it. You can see him in the Allsvenskan, a pretty great league. He has 8 goals, 15 points in 24 games. And at the World Juniors, I thought he was brilliant for Sweden. So good all around, doing so many little great things. He's somebody that offensively has some more pace and more punch than I think people even give him a credit for right now. I think he could be an excellent top 6 winger and somebody that the Flyers would just love to have for such a long time, playing their brand, even if he isn't 6'4". Now, the Flyers don't draft many Swedes as of late, but they did draft in the 2nd round Jack Berglund last year, so I think there's the possibility, even if it is a little more unlikely, that they go back to Sweden, and I think in Eklund's case, they should. Next up, let's go on to 8th overall in New York Islanders, and this is a player that I think would just be a perfect fit, a player I've been preaching throughout this year in Logan Hensler. Now, for the Islanders, they like their Badgers. They drafted Quinn Finley, who of course is having a monster year in the NCAA this year, so Hensler will be a part of that. But I think he will be a great mobile all-around defenseman for the Islanders. To me, the big weakness is the confidence, because there are times where he can kind of get in his own head. I think a lot of it is mental. He'll make a mistake and not really rebound well. But when Hensler is at his best, I think he could be a great transition D. The skating is beautiful. It's perfect, especially with his edge work, and he's able to escape pressure really well when he is using his feet. He's somebody that defensively has some great moments, and offensively, even though this Wisconsin team is pretty bad on offense, Hensler's had some great moments here and there, especially finding shooting lanes from the points. He's someone that I just think will be a great all-around 40, 50-point defenseman who will eat minutes for the Islanders. I mean, that's exactly the type of defenseman they love to have. Next up, let's move on to 9th overall and the Pittsburgh Penguins. This is an interesting one. The Pens haven't drafted this high in a long time, and they could really change that prospect pool with just one selection here. But I think they'll look at that defense and look at a Chris Letang type of player for the future, and I think Jackson Smith makes a lot of sense. Now, you did already draft Owen Pickering, who is another WHL left shot D, but Pickering's more of a two-way defenseman. You're already seeing him in the NHL today. But in Jackson Smith's case, he is all about creativity, all about confidence, all about pace, pretty much just the mini Matthew Schaefer of this draft. He has bigger tools, bigger size, especially with the physical traits, though I think using that more and being more sturdy defensively will be the biggest thing for him. He's always looking towards offense, and that can maybe be something to tweak, but he's very young for this draft, and the maturity isn't quite there, which is to be expected. You can see in the WHL this year, Tri-City, 29 points, 27 assists in 38 games. Some of the highlights are just breathtaking with him. He can just do so many things across the ice, looking for players so effortlessly, and he's just somebody that I think offensively, when we look at what the Penguins could really use, I think they could really use a pure pace pusher on that defense for the future. Once Chris Letang is gone, which could be very soon, Jackson Smith, I think, could come up and really perform well. Now let's go into the 10th overall spot, finishing up the top 10 with the St. Louis Blues. This was a team that I was kind of all over the place with on who I thought they would actually end up drafting. I was thinking maybe a right D, but considering they already went after Adam Juracek in the last draft, I think they consider that position potentially filled. I think the player that makes the most sense, though, and considering a little bit of a left wing issue for the future, I think Lyndon Lakovic could be really, really interesting on this team. In terms of size, he has that for the Blues, so you could check that off. but I really love the versatility on the rush. He's something that can just do so many different things. Reminds me a little bit of Beckett Seneca in last year's draft, where the transition play and just how confident he is really permeates his game. It's just such a big part of his toolbox. I think that is something that has led him to a lot of success this year. You see in 31 games, Moose Jaw, 39 points, on a team that really has traded away basically every single one of his weapons. I think in Lakovic's case, though, there's so much potential, so much confidence, and I just love what he could be in the future. And for the Blues, they love those type of projects. I mean, they're going to bring another one on. Now on to 11th overall in the New York Rangers. This is an interesting one because I think they could go all across the board. Frankly, their prospect pool kind of needs some big impact players. But I think at 11th overall, they're going to go for Caleb Denoye. I think they could really use a middle six center for the future, and Denoye checks all the boxes for that. He's a very skilled but very confident player that can use his body well, and I think in terms of his positioning, his IQ, and how that drives his play, he's just a solid player overall. Of course, the Rangers haven't been afraid to draft the QMJHL players like Alexis Lafreniere, and in this last draft, Royal Bayard, but you can see in 34 QMJHL games, he's been one of the leaders in the Q. 23 goals, 56 points. He's something that can be a very solid, potentially second-line center for the Rangers, though I think fills more of a great third-line center role. Considering the weakness, though, up front for the next few years in that prospect pool, I think Caleb Denoye could fix some of those issues. Then we go on to the Utah Hockey Club, who loves to draft physical players into their pool. And at 12th overall, I don't see that really changing. I think they will select out of the WHL Blake Fiddler, who I think just fits absolutely perfectly. You look at that left defense, and that's where a lot of their defensive prospects come. And of course, in the cases of Dmitry Simashev, they do have Lamoureux on that right side. But to me, Fiddler could be a really extraordinary defensive D for the Utah Hockey Club. You look at his size, 6'4", 209 pounds. He absolutely knows how to use it. Even though he is on the younger side of things for this draft, he is so mature already. And in terms of defensive reads with his stick and with his body, he's just able to just erase space so effortlessly, especially against the rush. You can see this year, though, he's had some offensive moments in 36 games, 6 goals, 17 points. He's somebody that I think with the shot is going to be the main asset offensively. I don't think you're going to be seeing much of a playmaker here or much of a pace driver. But in Fiddler's game, he knows what he is, and I think that's something that is very valuable. Now at 13th overall, let's go on to the Boston Bruins. And speaking of players who know who they are, let's go on to Kishan Aitchison, who I think will be the pick by the Bruins here. It'll be interesting because I don't think the Bruins have drafted many defensemen over the past 2 years, and I think they could really stand to add some beef into that side of the pool, and Aitchison absolutely does that. He's not extraordinarily big at 6'1", but he has 198 pounds, and he is an absolute tank. He's somebody that this year also has had some offense, led by that shot that is fast and reliable, 11 goals, 26 points in 36 games, but pay no mind to that because the physical play is what's going to be really valued here. He is such an aggressive player with his hitting, with his fighting. He is going to be battling every single player that moves on the ice, and he's somebody that will just be such an aggressor, such a hot rod out there. And I think he's going to be somebody the Bruins will absolutely adore. He'll play bottom pair minutes, eat a lot of minutes, be physical, and of course put up some pretty big fights, which I think for the Bruins is something they'll like to have. Do I think the Bruins should probably go for a higher potential player? Sure, but let's be honest. Next up at 14th overall in the Montreal Canadiens. Imagine the Habs being over the Bruins in your playoff predictions. If you guys had that, hats off to you, and that's how it's happening right now. At 14th, I was debating between a few players. Carter Bear, I think, will be fun there. You also got Justin Carbonneau. But in terms of who I think the Habs would target, I think Malcolm Spence makes a lot of sense. He's been a top draftee in this class for a while, and for good reason. 6'2", 201 pounds, and he's somebody that I think is just so mature in every single way. We talked about the IQ, we talked about how he uses it, but he's so smart in almost every decision he makes. And I think as a perfect third line player, that's exactly what you're going to get out of Spence. The versatility is there, I think, also to work with some of your top end players too. I think it could be all around the lineup, providing just great overall play. He's a 200-foot player, could work on your penalty kill, could be a solid bumper guy, could just do so many good things for you. And at 17 goals, 43 points this year, I think he's somebody that Montreal is going to love, and especially with that kind of hole on the left side, I think Spence could fill that pretty easily. Now we go into another Atlantic team here in the Detroit Red Wings, and this is another team that I think is going to draft similarly to how they've drafted before, but I think in this case, you're going to get a player that you're going to absolutely love in Shane Van Sage. Now, you do have Michael Branson-Newgard. I think Shane Van Sage is kind of up that same alley. He's so good with his physicality and really aggressive in terms of the forecheck. That, to me, is going to be one of the most important parts. But, of course, going to Michigan State, the Red Wings are going to be watching him quite a bit, and he's had a solid freshman season. You can see in 22 games, 2 goals, 9 assists, 11 points. The point production isn't going to pop off at you, and I don't think it's ever going to be amazing at the NHL level, but I see just a perfect third-line player here who's so aggressive, knows how to use his body, can just be so relentless and such a headache for opposing defensemen. He's going to create a lot of chaos and a lot of offense offense because of his physical play and the maturity there. I think that's something that Detroit will really want to have in their bottom 6. At 15th overall, you might want to go for a more inspired pick, but getting a solid NHLer 15th, I still think is pretty good. And now ending us off at 16th overall and the Vancouver Canucks. This is also one that I think could go all over the place, but I think considering the Canucks and their likelihood of potentially trading a centerman in JT Miller or Elias Pettersson, even though Miller I think is more likely, I think it's pretty understandable that they go for a center in this draft. And I think at 16th overall, Anton Frindell brings the most potential. Now, they could go for like a Jake O'Brien, but of course, with the Swedish connections the Canucks have, I think Anton Frindell would be a pretty fun pick there. He's someone that has struggled throughout points in this season, but I still think, especially over the last month, has looked a lot better offensively, a lot more confident using that shot more, which is great to see. You can see in 13 games, 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points, not bad production in the Ihs-Wozniak. I like his physical tools. I like the understanding of the game. It's just asserting himself more, I think, will be the big question mark for him, but I can see him being a solid second line center behind Pettersson for that Canucks team, and I think being a pretty good pick at 16th overall. But those are my top 16 picks for the draft this year, and some pretty fun ones, especially with how the draft lottery ended up. There's going to be a lot of chaos with this draft, no matter who gets first overall. But I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on my top 16. What you guys agreed with, what you guys disagree with, and what your top 16 might have looked like. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already, and share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. And of course, click on this card for all my 2025 draft content right in one playlist. And of course, sign up to BetUSA using code U2150. I will see you guys in the next one, though. Drink some water and have a great one. Goodbye.